I'm Clara Liao, NARDAC Chair. The panelists are glad to see many colleagues registered and are looking forward to communicating with you in the Q&A session. Here is today's agenda. I'm very grateful that Dr. Cohen from Europe RDA Interest Group and Ms. McGuire from Oceania RDA Committee accepted NARDAC's invitation and will bring us the updates about their RDA-related work. There will be a brief Q&A after NARDAC, EURIG, ORDAC's update sessions. There will be a general Q&A at the end of all presentations. Please note, to ensure we will be able to finish all the presentation, I will control the time for the brief Q&A session. Please keep sending your questions in the Q&A part. Keep your conversation in the chat box. Although we will try to cover as many questions as we can in the Q&A session. But if not all the questions can be answered, we will try to answer some of the popular or important questions in the future forums. Now let's move on to our first topic, NARDAC update. Our previous NARDAC update forum was held in June 2022 at ALA. So the following NARDAC updates happened from July to October. This year, NARDAC held 2 pre-conference workshops. One was in June at the ALA annual in DC. The other was held in October at the ALA's core forum in Salt Lake City. Both workshops not only include presentations about RDA conceptual framework, RDA-related rule interpretation, documentation setup, and use cases, but also contain hands-on exercises covering various formats. NARDAC members worked on answer sheets for the exercise, and they are now available to the workshop participants. From July through September, NARDAC members reviewed RSC 2022/2-4 proposals and forwarded the proposals to North America cataloging communities for feedback and comments, including ALA's Committee on Cataloging, Canadian Committee on Cataloging, and Library of Congress. In early October, NARDAC compiled the comments and passed them to the RDA Steering Committee before RSC's October conference. Based on the latest information, 2022 3 and 4 proposals have been passed with minor revisions, and proposal 2 hasn't been passed and will need some further work. So what's coming next? PCC RDA test is ongoing right now. Several NARDAC members will participate in the test as evaluators. With regard to that particular test, Adam Barron will cover more detailed information in the late session of this forum. NARDAC also plan to hold our spring update forum, possibly around March or April. Stay tuned. Okay, let's move on to the next session, the updates from EURIG. Our presenter is Dr. Ahava Cohen, EURIG's RSC representative. She's also the cataloging section head at National Library of Israel. I believe it's your evening time, right, Dr. Cohen?
Well,
thanks a lot.
Pretty much night.
Thanks a lot for staying late for us. Hand it over to you.
Thank you for inviting me.
Sure.
Might as well go straight to the first slide. Thanks very much for inviting me, and good evening, good night from Israel, where it's a little after 10 p.m. I have to admit that most of my experience with North American Cataloging Committee comes off of Twitter, where I spend way too much time on the cataloging feed. And I've been very aware ever since I wrote my doctorate on RDA what cataloging Twitter has to say about RDA Steering Committee member. So I just wanted to preface my remarks by explaining a little of where I come from as a cataloger. At the National Library of Israel, I'm in charge of 3 descriptive cataloging departments. Between them, we have about 17 full-time equivalent staffers, and we catalog largely original cataloging, about 4,400 manifestations a month. We do this in 4 languages of cataloging: Hebrew, Arabic, English, and Russian. We also maintain, and I help manage, the Israeli National Authority file, which is a consortium of 23 different libraries, where we have about 1.9 million name authority records, which are multi-script, meaning that they could have an authorized access point in any combination of Arabic, Cyrillic, Hebrew, and Latin characters. So as you can tell, I really am not just some theoretician. I am very practical. I do need to know how RDA can be implemented in my shop, and I'm not some strange outlier on the RDA Steering Committee. Most of us are working catalogers, and we do need to know how RDA can be implemented in our shops. So it's not that we're divorced from the field, unlike some of what Twitter might think. Clara, could you please go to the next slide? And to expand this outward, the RDA interest group in Europe, EURIG, is comprised of 52 member bibliographic agencies in 31 countries, where we work with more than 28 languages of cataloging and 5 different scripts. So we really are concerned about how we can implement RDA, which is written in English, in our own cataloging departments. Most of us do not speak English as our native language, and most of us don't use English as our language of cataloging. Given how heterogeneous we are, sometimes amazes me how much we actually get accomplished. We have our annual meeting, which we've been doing on Zoom since 2020. And here I'm going to suggest, since you can't click on links, participants take a screenshot of this, because we're having our RDA in Europe Day, which will again happen over Zoom, this Thursday on the 17th of November, and you can still register. We're going to have a very strong session on aggregates, both from people who are the ones who wrote a lot of the theory and a lot of the instructions about aggregates, and also people who have concerns about the way the official toolkit deals with aggregates. So it's really going to be an interesting session. And please do register and join us. Our mailing list is open to anyone in the world, so feel free to join us if you're interested in discussions of internationalization. And we also try to hold an RDA translators meeting in conjunction with the RDA Steering Committee, or with the EURIG annual meetings. And as I said, the links to the program, the registration for RDA in Europe, and the EURIG mailing list are all on this slide. Take a screen grab, a picture lasts longer. And please do use the links. Next slide. We also obviously participate in the development of RDA. We have a very strong editorial committee, which does what Clara spoke previously about NARDAC, compiles and creates reactions and responses to proposals and discussion papers for the RDA Steering Committee. We're involved in all of the task and done working groups that are currently happening. Obviously, we're very strongly involved in the translations working group, because most of the translations that are currently underway are happening within Europe. And next year's RDA RSC position holders are about half will be coming from within EURIG. The upcoming chair, the upcoming secretary, and the upcoming translation team liaison are all from EURIG countries. Given all that, it's clear why we've been pushing against the Anglo-American Western Christian bias information instructions in the toolkit from day one. We need a toolkit that will allow us to implement RDA within our own catalogs without feeling like we're doing something that's not. Next slide, please. So how did we get from the beginnings of RDA to where we are today? The first stirrings of internationalization were seen 11 years ago. Next slide. It started out with implementation of governance in the OG toolkit, the original toolkit. It started out by letting the Germans sit in on the Joint Steering Committee meeting, a commitment of the Committee of Principals to add 2 more members by 2015, which didn't exactly happen, but we're still hopeful to get more regions involved in the RDA Steering Committee. EURIG was founded in 2011, and then the Germans joined the Joint Steering Committee in 2012, making it the first group that weren't one of the copyright holders to really have influence on the development of RDA. Next slide. There was also the implementation and how that internationalized RDA. There was a big push for obvious reasons to get as many subscribers to the toolkit as could be. And at this point, we have more than 65 countries in which there are subscribers to the toolkit over 6 continents. If anyone knows any cataloging polar bears, let us know. Maybe we can get all the continents. And obviously the RDA registry, which is a lot of the basis for full and partial translations of the terminology being used in RDA, and that has been around for years. Next slide. In the new toolkit, along with all the other changes that 3R brought around, there was an opportunity to pull out the Anglo-American specific content as a strategic goal, and the RDA board in 2019 starts talking about how important it is to internationalize the content, and in 2020 put up information about the internationalization principles as they saw it. Next slide. And the RSC starts working also at the same time, internationalizing the content, making internationalization of the content a specific goal. RSC meetings are increased because when you have a group that doesn't have English as its native language, needs to read proposals written in English, discuss them within their own communities, in their own languages, meaning some of that information needs to get translated, make their decisions about how they want to respond, translate that response back into English, you need a much longer lead time. You can't expect people who don't speak English as a native language to be able to react as quickly as those who do speak English as a native language. There was also discussion amongst different indigenous groups and non-Anglo groups about where we thought the RDA toolkit had guidelines that didn't fit our worldviews. And then the RDA said, this is important, this is a goal, we're going to devote resources to this. Next slide. So now that a great deal, though not all of the Anglo-American content has been moved out of base RDA, and internationalization is an annual goal every single year for the board and the steering committee, what are we seeing in practice? Next slide. Well, we're seeing multiple asynchronous RSC meetings, not just the October meeting, which didn't have a very long lead time, but breaking up the proposals throughout the year so we can get more community involvement and more involvement of people who need time to process English language proposals and discussion papers. We've got the wider community engagement officer position, which brings in people from the regions that don't yet have representation on the RDA Steering Committee, Latin America and Asia, which is a huge region. And there's also, and this started previous to 3R, flexibility in the boundaries of RDA region. I'm not sure if you noticed this, but Israel isn't in Europe except for RDA and Eurovision. And yet we were allowed to join Europe because it was felt that we had something to contribute and we shouldn't have to wait until Asia, where technically we belong, was created as a region. And we're very thankful to the RDA Steering Committee and RDA Board for allowing this. And this can serve as a way forward for groups that want to be more involved. Next slide, please. In the toolkit, we've got boilerplate text, which allows translation teams to take the same text that appears over and over and over in the toolkit, translate it once, and it keeps getting reused. It makes translation faster. It makes changes easier to keep up with because you don't need to keep translating things. You translate it once and the system can already handle it. The legacy, and I know some people don't like the term legacy, but it's not a pejorative term. It was used in the RDA Toolkit original version. It's used all the time in LIS literature. Legacy is a good thing, even if it's not the most current thing. The legacy Anglo-American guidelines were moved out of base RDA so that what's left applies to everyone and not just the Anglo-American community. And we're now that 3R is finished for the most part, we're starting to encourage fast track proposals and discussion papers and larger proposals from communities throughout the world. Hopefully there will be information coming during 2023 to help communities and agencies that would like to create proposals to help them through the process. Next slide. This is an example of one of the working groups and how it was internationalized. This is the membership of the Official Languages Working Group, which is discussing the question of how to deal with names of corporate bodies in more than one language. And aside from the ex officio member and the chair who comes from the United States, everyone else comes from a country that deals with multiple languages, and most of them catalog in more than one language. So you've taken a topic that's of particular interest to a group and allowed the members of that group to help create the guide of imposing that decision on one group from another group that really doesn't deal with that topic as part of their day-to-day cataloging. Next slide, please. And here's an example of why we need to pull the Anglo-American legacy instructions out of base RDA. An example from one of my languages of cataloging, from Hebrew. This is what appears in the original toolkit. It tells me what to do with a letter that can serve as a definite article in Hebrew. And it tells me that I can just remove it. Except grammatically in Hebrew, you can't, because it's not a standalone like the word the, and it does not like the transliteration. It's not a separate part of the word, it's integral. And also, this instruction doesn't tell me that that letter can appear as part of the root of a word and not be a definite article, and that sometimes it'll appear as a prefix, but it isn't a prefix as a definite article. It's telling me that there's a question. And you can't even tell from looking at a single word. I might have the word haboker, which could mean the morning, or it could mean, is it morning? And none of this information is given here, which could confuse a cataloger working on a Hebrew resource who's trying to follow the rules, but doesn't really know Hebrew grammar. And there are a lot of people who have to deal with languages that they aren't experts in. Next slide, please. In the community resources section of the current toolkit, things change a little. The instructions tell me that this is to be used for people working with materials in this language, but using English as the language of cataloging, and that if I'm using Hebrew as my language of cataloging, these instructions may not apply. That already opens the door and allows language communities to make their own rules about how to treat their own languages while still allowing the Anglo-American community to have their transliteration and know how to deal with the transliteration. In the spirit of nothing about us without us, the cataloging in English community is admitting that they can't tell another community how to deal with their own language, which traditionally Anglo-American cataloging has done. Next slide, please. But you guys don't catalog in all these different languages. And the small variety of languages of cataloging in the NARDAC region isn't as diverse as it is in EURIG. So why should you care? How does it help you guys? Why should you get behind all the efforts? Well, one of the things is that 61% of WorldCat refers to non-English manifestations. If you want to go back to the original cataloging record in the country or language where that manifestation was issued, you need to understand the rules under which the manifestation was cataloged. If it's in the toolkit in the community resources section, you can refer to it and say, oh, that's why they made that choice. Okay, now I understand it. Is it relevant to the rules in NARDAC? Is it relevant to the rules in my shop? Then you have decisions to make, but at least you're making an informed decision. And that's why a well-developed and maintained community resource section, which will have information about multiple languages and how they refine and what vocabularies they use, it'll support data exchange because you'll understand how to look at other countries' catalogs. And as I said before, the fact that the community resources section will have instructions for Anglo-American practice and for non-Anglo-American practices is a win-win because everyone will understand each other, and yet you'll know what to do in your own situations. And one of the most important things is once non-Anglo-American catalogers aren't busy trying to adapt RDA to work for their own languages and for their own cultures, they'll have more time to spend on the development of RDA, which means that it frees up time within the Anglo-American community because there are more people looking at everything critically, finding things that need to be enhanced, finding lacuna, and we'll all be working to develop the system. And that can never be a bad thing. Next slide. I know we're going to have questions after ORDAC, but if for some reason we don't get to all the questions you might have, please feel free to drop me an email, send me a WhatsApp, a DM on Twitter. I'm available 24/6, and I would love to hear from you. And again, thank you so much for inviting me to join your update.
Thank you so much, Dr. Cohen. Okay, our next presenter is Anoushka McGuire, ORDAC's chair and the cataloging team leader of National Library of New Zealand. Good morning, Anoushka. Kiora is my pronunciation correct? Hand it over to you.
Hello, everyone, and kia ora. Good morning from a very sunny morning here in Wellington, New Zealand. So I look after one of the 3 cataloging teams at the National Library of New Zealand, and I'm also, as Clara said, the current chair of the Oceania RDA Committee. It's so lovely to be here to share a little bit more about the RDA work that ORDAC is doing in Oceania. Okay, so next slide, please. So it will be a very quick presentation. Oh dear, that doesn't look good. Sorry about that. Right, but what I will cover today, what is ORDAC, who is ORDAC, what do we do, and the challenges of our region. So what is ORDAC? I'm very grateful to have followed Dr. Cohen's presentation because she's wonderfully given a background on the structure of RSC. So next slide, please. So there are six, these are the 6 geographic regions to be represented on the RSC since the change in the RSC governance structure in 2015. And of these 6, only 3 regions have formally convened bodies, of which ORDAC is one. Next slide, please. Right, so Oceania is a very large part of the Southern Pacific Ocean. Our region represents Australia, New Zealand, Micronesia, Melanesia, Polynesia, and includes many small island nations with a lot of ocean in between. Before ORDAC existed, the region was represented on the Joint Steering Committee, or the JSC, through the Australian Committee on Cataloguing, or ACOC. And after the change in the governance structure of the RSC, ACOC reached out to the equivalent New Zealand body to discuss forming a regional committee. We worked on this through 2016 and through 2017, and the board, the RDA board, accepted ORDAC's terms of reference in February 2018, and we've been working together as a region since then. So now, who is ORDAC? I thought I'd introduce you to our membership. Our membership is still just drawn from Australia and New Zealand, as these are the only countries in the region where institutions have implemented RDA. So we have 2 national libraries in the region that have implemented RDA, and we have Michaela Goodwin from the National Library of Australia and Charlotte Christensen from the National Library of New Zealand. Then we have 4 representatives of the resource description bodies of the region's library associations. So our equivalent of the American Library Association or the Canadian Committee on Cataloguing. So for Australia, this body is ACORD, the ALIA Community on Resource Description, which is part of the Australian Library and Information Association. We have Eb Cardis, who you may recognise as a former RSC member, and Melissa Parent, who's our current Oceania RSC representative. So for New Zealand, the body is CATSIG, or the Lianza Cataloguing Special Interest Group, which is part of the Library and Information Association of New Zealand Aotearoa. So there's me, who's the chair of ORDAC at the moment, and our newest recruit is Bridget Jennings, who has just joined us in the last fortnight. And finally on the committee, we have the RDA board representative for Oceania sits as an ex officio member on the committee to strengthen ties and so that we work more closely with the RDA board. Excuse me. This role rotates between the national libraries of the region. So previously, until the end of last year, it was the National Library of New Zealand who provided a board representative. And beginning of the year, or the end of the year, I'm not sure, it's been the National Library of Australia. Currently, this role is in transition as the incumbent has just left the National Library of Australia and their replacement is still being brought on board. So then what does ORDAC do? Our focus is the same as other regional groups, and these are our top 3 areas of focus. Our top focus is first, we represent the interests of RDA users in the Oceania region on the RSC. We primarily do this by selecting the Oceania representative to the RSC, ensuring that they're fully prepared and supported to present the viewpoint of Oceania at the RSC meetings. And of course, reading, responding, writing papers for the RSC meetings. So the next thing we focus on is contributing positively to the development of RDA by disseminating information and seeking feedback on RDA and RDA development. We do this by ensuring that news from the RSC and other documentation and useful announcements are shared on the Australian and New Zealand cataloguing lists, including the list that ORDAC administers, which is RDA Oceania. We also provide updates to the community through CATSIG's newsletter Catapult and via the Accord website. And then finally, our third focus is to promote and encourage the implementation of RDA by libraries in the Oceania region. So at the moment, this has been sort of a lower priority, but we have been delivering presentations and webinars when we can. You may have seen Melissa Parent's webinars on application profiles earlier this year, and I've presented recently to the CATSIG professional development website, professional development webinar series that we ran through October. So what's coming up? Upcoming RSC meetings, of course, are top of mind, with the next meeting in January coming up fast for us, particularly with our annual summer shutdown. North Americans might not be aware that, but in Australia and New Zealand, we pretty much shut down between Christmas and New Year, and for a lot of January, because of course it's our summer here, and a lot of people do take their summer breaks, and the public service does shut down as well. So we'll be planning more outreach activities in 2023 as it gets closer to institutions like the National Library of New Zealand implementing the new toolkit. Accord and CATSIG surveyed our communities at the end of 2021 just to gauge how people were feeling in regards to the new toolkit and what kind of training and support that the community wants. And our responses strongly suggested that everybody wants us to be planning training and support that provides clear pathways into the new toolkit, is practical and is made available flexibly, that is online and recorded and freely available. But there is an interest in meeting people in person, especially after the last couple of years. So while moving completely online over the past couple of years has widened our audience and has been very good for reaching people, we've had feedback that right now people do want in-person, hands-on practical workshops where cataloguers can chat to each other and network and just really, dig into hands-on work. So our region's last in-person event were a pair of RDA workshop days back in 2018. So it's long overdue for something like that. So next slide, the challenges of our region. All right, our top challenges are really all related to how diverse the countries in Oceania are. First, Oceania is geographically spread out with many tiny island nations that are hard to see in this picture. There are lots of countries with lots of languages other than English, which of course is not unique to our region, as Dr. Cohen has shared. But what really is the challenge of our region, which may be different to the other RSC regions, is the economic and technical disparities across the region. This is a region where a severe tropical storm can wipe out a country's library and archives overnight, or a tsunami can severely disrupt the infrastructure of an entire country, as happened in Tonga earlier this year. And the infrastructure itself can often be very poor, especially for things that we take for granted, like fast internet and reliable electricity. So in terms of resource description and library infrastructure generally, we have two large, well-resourced countries and many smaller countries that may have other more pressing priorities than RDA. So as I said earlier, at the moment, only institutions in Australia and New Zealand have implemented RDA that we know of. And if you're listening from a Pacific institution and you have implemented RDA, we would so love to hear from you, because we really would like to increase the geographic representation of the geographic representation on ORDAC, and in future represent many more communities as possible within, not just Australia and New Zealand. And we know that we haven't done as much in this area as it have. The other thing that's a contrast to other RSC regions, that there are only 2 national libraries that have implemented RDA. And that means there are only 2 national libraries to do that heavy lifting in terms of contributing to the RSC. So compare it to EURIG, which has over 25 national libraries by my North America, of course, doesn't have national libraries either, many national libraries either, but does have many large, well-resourced academic libraries who contribute. Australia and New Zealand, also the number of large academic libraries and public libraries that have dedicated cataloguing staff and the resources to put into the development of RDA is shrinking. And this has made it difficult for our years to recruit people to join ORDAC or RSC working groups. So to summarise, I would say, the main challenge in our region is that we are geographically large, but in terms of capacity, we're much smaller than other regions. So to find out more, if you'd like to know more about ORDAC, we have a nice page on the RSC website that includes contact information. You can find information list there, and we do have a section where we have put our presentations and training materials that we have created for the ORDAC community. There's not much there at the moment, but as I said, 2023, we are really hoping that we will be doing much more for our community. And so then, thank you for having me. Again, apologies for the slide. I'm not sure what's going on there, but if you can see, I'm very happy if people want to email me later with questions or anything. Thank you.
Thank you, Anoushka. So now we have time for a brief Q&A. Jamie, do you have any questions for NARDAC, EURIG, and ORDAC?
Not yet. I'm going to give folks a moment to type in questions if they have questions. I did, while we wait, I'll mention that in chat, I did share a couple of the links that Dr. Cohen had on her slide, so people can check chat for those links.
Mm-hmm. So if we will see, if not many questions coming, we will move on to our next session. Oh, I've seen popping up questions.
Oh yeah, here we go. First one is from, is in an internationalized context, how does RDA deal with the challenge of providing examples in the toolkit which apply to all users?
I'll take that one. Because there are so many different countries that catalog resources in different languages, having multilingual examples can only help even someone who catalogs within an Anglo-American context. And one of the things that EURIG is hoping to revive, we started it before Corona, and then it sort of didn't progress enough because of the separation of people, is having a EURIG set of examples that we will donate to base RDA, whatever they would like to use. And then anyone who's working on translations or local handbooks can feel free to use whichever examples will work for them within the context. The more examples there are to choose from, the better the toolkit will end up being.
Then we have another question. How many libraries in Australia and New Zealand implemented RDA outside of the national libraries?
I'm afraid I can't give you an exact number. Most libraries, I can definitely say in New Zealand, most libraries have, but I can't give numbers, sorry.
Anoushka, just curious whether for the library who decide to implement RDA, is there any special code they use to indicate that the records they output kind of RDA records?
Oh, just standard mark coding in
Okay.
the 040
Okay.
leader.
And then there's a question about, do most libraries all over the world use OCLC to send their records to?
I don't have an answer to that. I can tell you that it's very difficult working with OCLC if you don't use the Latin character set, because a lot of the enhancements which OCLC does to records, which were the basis of the whole ex libris OCLC issues, can't happen if the language of cataloging is not in a Latin script. So in Israel, we do send our records from the large university libraries and from the national libraries, but no enhancement happens on our Hebrew, Arabic, or Russian records, just on our English records. So even when things get sent to OCLC, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're getting OCLC services.
Any other questions?
One more. For these two presentations, adoption of RDA means the original toolkit. Are other national libraries using official toolkit to catalog?
I can answer that the National Library of New Zealand has not yet started using the official toolkit to catalogue. At the moment, looking for 2023, maybe, perhaps, but not yet. Still original toolkit.
And throughout Europe, it's still the original toolkit, although I will say in Israel, there are some things that we're cherry picking out of the new toolkit, such as the idea of a representative expression, which is very, very helpful for cataloging Judaica.
Great. Thanks a lot for all the questions and then the great answers from our presenters. Now, I think let's move on to our next session. Our next topic is about RSC's action plan. Our presenter is Kathy Glennan, RDA Steering Committee Chair. She's also the Director of Cataloging and Metadata Services at the University of Maryland. Hand it over to you, Kathy.
Thank you, Clara. Hello, everyone. Clara asked me if I would talk about the RC action plan that is currently under development, which is for the next 3 years. So I've titled this Future Projections because it always feels like we're sort of looking into a crystal ball to try to figure out what we should be doing and when it can get done. Next slide, please. Thanks. So this is a rolling 3-year plan. We're asked to do it every year. It's required by the RDA's 2018 RDA agreement, which is the current operating document that governs the RC activities and the board's activities. And in the quote, annually, the RDA Steering Committee shall submit for approval to the RDA Board of Delegates an updated 3-year rolling plan, including a development program based on expertise and user consultation. So those are our marching orders. The rolling plan is based on the strategic plan for RDA. The latest version covers 2020 to 2022 and is available on the board section of the RDA website, the RSC website. The RDA board has started discussing the next 3-year plan, not get as far as chair of the RSC that I would have hoped at this point. The RSC will participate in finalizing that plan, and we anticipate that a new strategic plan will be in place in early 2023. You'll note that the strategic plan is for RDA and not for the RSC. We reached agreement in developing the 2020 plan. The RDA board chair and myself agreed that this should be for the standard and not for the individual committees. That in fact, if we would be foolish not to embrace the same strategic directions for RDA itself in these two groups. We had a hiatus on these rolling 3-year plans during the 3R project, but we did resume them starting in 2020. So these are all available on the RSC website, 2020 through 22 and so forth. But the latest one is still under development. Next slide, please. So this, as I mentioned, left me with a bit of a conundrum. How do I build an RSC action plan if the thing that it's based on ends in 2022 and I need a plan that covers 2023 to 2025? Well, I got the board to agree during their last meeting that we would continue to follow the 2020 to 2022 strategic plan until it was replaced, and that generally speaking, there would be no substantive change in direction of the strategic goals that are laid out in the original strategic plan. There will be adjustments, there will be tweaks, there will be rewordings, there may be some redirection, but not substantial in a way that the RSC would have to react to if we came up with our own action plan. So our new plan will focus on the existing strategic goals, which are summarized here, but are in more detail in the actual plan. Develop RDA as a responsive and dynamic standard, which is principles-based. We have to have a clear maintenance program, and we need to communicate the changes. We want to increase the adoption of RDA with outreach to underrepresented regions and to improve the applicability of RDA for languages and specialized resources. And you've heard a lot about both underrepresented regions, or at least areas, and the challenges of applying RDA outside of its original English language context from other speakers today. We're also charged to provide relevant governance and to develop and subsequently review policies and procedures. Next. This led the original structure of the 2020 to 2022 strategic plan. We broke it into 4 categories, which we are continuing to use today. There's standing tasks, which are done every year. It seems very silly to repeat these every single time, but instead to gather them as at the top as a reminder of our ongoing work and responsibilities, communicating them both to the committee and to anyone who cares about the committee's works. By definition, these standing tasks will never be done, although we might certainly make significant progress on them. Tasks identified for year 1 would be the anticipated actions for the next 12-month period. This will include uncompleted actions from the previous year, and sadly, those do happen. They might also include multi-year tasks, but broken down by year with changing adjectives or verbs that indicate progression. So year 1 might include begin doing such and such, and year 2 might say continue doing such and such, and year 3, if we're really lucky, we'll say complete doing such and such. As we get on to year 2 and year 3 in these rolling plans, they're much less specific. There are many fewer entries, and there's much more uncertainty as to the timing. So they know they're things that we know are on our radar that we hope to get to. We know they won't be in the next 12 months. We don't want to forget that they're there, but they're going to be a little fungible, perhaps. Next slide. So I thought it would be interesting to compare the 2022 tasks from the original plan that projected 2022 as year 3 and what happened to those tasks. So we optimistically thought in 2020 that we would be reviewing the status of the countdown clock and community implementations of RDA in 2022. That task remains, but it's now scheduled for 2024. The same thing happened with further development of the Nomen and time span instructions, something we'd like to do. We have other priorities, and this has taken a backseat to some of those, but it's still on the plan. We wanted to receive and act on the final recommendations of the Application Profiles Working Group. That group submitted an interim report, but no final report, and we discharged them in April 2022. We've taken on some of the directions from that interim report, and we do appreciate the work that that group did. We want to receive and act on recommendations of other task and finish working groups. This is effectively a standing task, and we probably won't be breaking that out separately anymore. Anytime we have task and finish working groups, which we expect to be ongoing. The mix will change, but the group's existence and various projects should continue. So once we have those groups, then we ought to pay attention to them. We also had be alert to developments with ISSN and ISBN standards and the impact on harmonizing with RDA. This has been moved to 2023 and expanded to include other international standards like IFLA, ICP, and NARDAC. This may turn into a standing task because although we know that there's certain projects going on right now that call our particular attention to these developments, any changes in these standards that have impact on harmonizing with RDA need to be on our radar. The original plan said we should be continuing bid frame mapping by 2022. Begin bid frame mapping is now a 2023 task, so that's been a little bit harder to get started than we first hoped. The other two tasks are also important, but again, have taken a backseat to some of the other developments. And they both have to do with outreach to archives and seeing how the standard can be applied outside of the library world into a broader GLAM consideration. So we would like to do that. In terms of priorities, these tasks remain, but they're now scheduled for 2024 and 2025. Next. So what do we complete? I've touched on this a little bit. We appointed or reappointed the RSC Secretary-elect, the Education and Outreach Officer, and the Translations Team Liaison Officer. All of the RSC Secretary and the other two individual positions listed here had terms that were ending in 2022. So we've taken care of completing the RSC membership. As I mentioned, we thanked and disbanded the Application Profiles Working Group. We also received and discussed progress reports from all of our 4 task and finish working groups, providing feedback to them as needed or requested. We developed general principles for the community resources area that Ahava mentioned in her presentation. We discussed the placement and potential integration of application profiles in Toolkit itself. And we directly made progress on improving communication with RDA users, although we still expect you to come to our website in part to find out some of these things. We posted more announcements on our site. We created a new additions and changes to the website page. So if you want to know what happened since you were last there, there's easier to figure that out. We determined that we needed to hold public sessions during RSC meetings when discussion papers or proposals are discussed. So we have sent out Zoom links to observers to be able to attend those parts of RSC meetings when these happen. When we met in person, we would allow observers. So we are doing observers in a Zoom setting. We're also distributing public minutes after every RSC meeting. The RSC is currently meeting quarterly, and of late, we've been discussing papers or proposals at every one of those meetings. And we know that you as RDA users might actually want to know what we decided. So we are making those public minutes available within probably about 6 weeks after the meeting ends. Next. So a sneak peek at the action plan. What I'm showing you next is not finalized. It is what the RSC has discussed to date. Next. So in terms of our standing tasks, there's not a lot of change here, but maybe a little bit of clarification. Direct RDA development to ensure continued alignment with the governing objectives that are laid out in the guidance chapter, the responsiveness to user needs, cost efficiency, flexibility, continuity, and internationalization. And we need to report yearly on our progress toward internationalization of the standard to the board. We want to add and adjust examples. We obviously are providing content updates of RDA for the toolkit releases. We want to continue RDA editorial cleanup, both in the registry and in the content management system. So depending on which version of RDA you're using, whether it's from the registry or from the toolkit, you may see some benefits from that. We need to continue guidance chapter development and clarifications and to be responsive to user feedback. Next. But wait, there's more. We need to review membership and tasks of all of the RSC working groups, adjusting those as needed. And of course, we want to interact with those working groups, monitoring their progress and providing input as they need help from us. We want to act on submitted discussion papers or proposals from all sources, including the regions. We're also here to provide expertise and support for RDA communities, as you can witness from this presentation, and all the RSC speakers who are here participating in this NARDAC forum today. We're here for you. If you need us, that's part of what we do. We also want to provide outreach to new communities as opportunities arise. We also need to keep our own house in order by updating our operations documents and creating additional procedural documents as needed. And of course, we always want to refine our processes and make them more orderly and efficient wherever possible. So anything related to cleaning up or facilitating translations, policy statement updating, registry updating, and so forth. Next. So anticipated tasks for 2023, developing RDA as a responsive and dynamic standard. We actually anticipate that many regions may want to start submitting proposals and discussion papers for RSC discussion again. So we want to offer support to those communities about how to do that and how to make that as efficient as possible process, so that you don't get a lot of back and forth from the RSC saying, oh, this isn't what we were looking for. Oh, we need this kind of direction. So we're looking to give probably a webinar and maybe some written documentation about how to make effective discussion papers and proposals. Obviously, we need to contribute to the development of the strategic plan for RDA in the next 3 years. We will continue review of community resources area and communicate the outcomes to our users. We need to provide support for training to those transitioning to the official toolkit. Now, we can't be as specific to this audience as NARDAC can or PCC, but we can provide the context and maybe an outline or basic structure for people who are looking to do training and trying to figure out the best way to do that and where the authoritative information is, or some suggestions for how to approach training on the new toolkit. We want to address placement, potential integration, and functionality of application profiles within the toolkit. We need to prepare a new guidance chapter on the collection level description that we approved last year. There's the famous one, begin bid frame mapping. We also need to review the concept of performance aggregates and begin planning for the removal of soft deprecated elements. That's going to go fairly slowly because we know that you're using them or that you expect to use them. You'll see that show up in a few other summaries for anticipated tasks for the rest of this plan. And as I mentioned earlier, being alert to developments with international standards for their impact on RDA. Next. For increase the adoption of RDA, we want to continue to support the regional groups. We want to investigate an affiliate RSC membership status for regions that are not represented on the RSC. That would be Africa, Asia, and Latin America and the Caribbean. We understand that there's a pretty high barrier to stepping up and representing a massive 1/6 of the globe region, especially if you need to communicate in a language that is not your native language. So we think maybe some sort of affiliate status and getting someone comfortable with being on the RSC and what we do without having maybe the full heavy burden or the perceived heavy burden of being a regional rep might be a good approach to that. And of course, that we assume that the first region that would be willing to join the RSC is Latin America and the Caribbean. We would love to help orient that region to being a full-fledged member of the RSC. In terms of providing relevant governance, we need to recruit or reappoint 2 positions before the end of 2023, the RDA Examples Editor and the Wider Community Engagement Officer. And we're looking into how we might improve our existing protocols and assign liaisons with other information standards groups, including potentially a different or new alignment within IFLA. Next. All right, so now we'll get into the more vague territory, and I didn't break these down by those strategic directions. So there's that countdown clock again. When we're ready to start talking about the countdown clock, the RSC will be involved, as will the RDA board. The community resources area, we expect to be an ongoing area that needs our attention, and there will be growing pains, but I think you'll also find the outcomes to be useful. That's what our goals are. Bib frame mapping will not be simple enough. We expect to be completed in a single year. So in 2024, it will continue. We will continue planning for the removal of the soft deprecated elements. We would like to form a working group to further the development of the collective agent entity and reestablish the music working group. There's that further development of the Nomen and time span instructions. And the thing that you saw about reaching out to archival or other communities in collaboration with the RDA board. And then we will need to recruit or reappoint the technical team liaison officer and the translations team liaison officer, whose terms expire in 2024. Next. In 2025, notice the list is getting shorter and shorter. If needed, we will review the status of the countdown clock. We will begin executing the plan for the removal of soft deprecated elements as long as the work done in the previous 2 years suggests that that's the right thing to do, of course. We will continue the outreach to archival or other communities in collaboration with the board. We expect to establish the new archives working group, and we will need to reappoint or recruit the RDA examples editor and the wider community engagement officer. And also 2025 will be the year to recruit for the RSC chair-elect. The chair-elect is determined hopefully more than 1 year in advance of the taking on the term as chair, so that that person has a year plus a little to shadow the current chair and feel comfortable before stepping up to the leadership position. Next. So when will you see the final versions of these documents I've been talking about? Well, the RDA strategic plan for 2023 to 2025, I hope will be completed in the first quarter of 2023 and released on the RSC website. The RSC action plan, I hope we will get that completed in January 2023. In any case, watch for announcements on RSC related sites to find out when these documents are complete. And for more information, I have my usual slide next of resources that I think you might find helpful. The RDA Steering Committee website, which I've referred to a number of times, the news and announcements, the RSC documents. The action plan, when it's released, will be in the chair series. Always a favorite is the presentations by year, at least it's one of my favorites. And if you want to stay informed, of course, visit the official Toolkit website, or the Toolkit YouTube channel, and the strategic plan for RDA when it is released should be linked on the RDA's boards page. Next. If you have questions, of course, hold them for the end of this session, but if not, you're welcome to email me at my current RSC email address through the end of the calendar year, or at my old and still to be used while I am past chair for a year RDA Toolkit address in 2023. It's been an honor serving as the RSC chair for the last 4 years, and I thank all of you for your attention and support.
Thank you, Kathy. ALA recently posted an announcement about opening community resources space in the RDA Toolkit and encouraged for feedback on the statement. Jamie Hennelly, the director of RDA Toolkit, will bring us some details about the plan. Jamie, hand it over to you.
Thank you, Clara. You can go to the next slide. So community resources space, which is under the resources tab on the RDA Toolkit, was created as a home for RDA instructions that were deemed no longer consistent with RDA's internationalization commitment. Ahava raised some of these issues in her presentation. A lot of this content comes from appendices regarding capitalization and abbreviation and definitive articles, etc., like that for different languages. And then there's several that touch upon specialized content, such as access points for legal, musical works, legal works, government publications, official communications, religious works, etc. So the practices described in those seem to be very specific to Anglo-American usage. And so they were moved to this new space called community resources to make them officially not RDA, but recognized they were retained because they recognized that there's still a lot of value to that content among our toolkit users. So that English language content is preserved as legacy content right now in the community resources. It is fixed. It is not being edited or updated. It is not being reviewed by the RSC. Any changes or updates to rethinking to that content will have to be done by some new entity that takes responsibility for it. I'll discuss that in a little bit, in greater detail in a little bit. So with the movement of that material to this community resources space, the RDA board and the RSC and everyone involved came to agree that, well, if we're moving this space, this kind of content over here for English language users, then we have to open it up to different language users as well. Those using any of the translated languages that are on the toolkit, and even a wider community beyond that, not just language communities, but subject matter communities, etc. Next slide. So we set forth, I think Kathy mentioned in her speech some of the things the RSC has been up to in the last year. And one of these is kind of setting some parameters for this community resources area. And so these are the goals we kind of set up that we wanted it to meet. We wanted it to be available to all interested communities of subscribers. We also wanted to be able to make use of existing toolkit technology and capabilities as much as possible, and try and minimize the development work that would be necessary with opening up this space. And that is kind of a tricky thing too, because there's a lot of, I know that there'll be a lot of different needs of because the communities we interact with are so varied. So we also have to kind of keep our minds open that we may have to do some development just to make all this work. The RC and toolkit publishers will have oversight of this CR development, including assigning administrative roles and setting guidelines for contributing communities and eligible content. So we really want to set some parameters about what we think are the proper communities to be adding content to the CR space, and also just kind of set some broad parameters of what types of content should be going into the CR space. Next slide. More goals. Contributors will have responsibility for the development and maintenance of the content. So you know, as far as what is the actual content, we do turn that entirely over to the contributors. We expect them to create it and to maintain it and update it as they see fit. Contributors must clearly identify the authorship of the content and state that it is not official RDA. So in some of the cases I'm about to describe, some of these pages might look like RDA pages, but we want to make it clear to users that they know who's written the content that they're reading, and understand that it's not official RDA content, it's specific to a community. Content will be searchable and easily identified as CR content in search results. So we do want to make this fully available to all toolkit users through search, and obviously through browse too, and identify it and tag it appropriately as community resource content. two solutions. So that slide didn't work out quite right. I got two number ones. They are equal. So we have two basically established toolkit capabilities that we think will apply to the developing the community resources space. And they come with different features. One is access to our CMS. That's our content management system. That's what our translators use. That's what our policy statement writers use. And that's what the RSC writers use to get their content onto the toolkit. Now, it's our content management system exists online and it's accessible online to all our contributors. But as we open up community resources, it's going to be a lot of people potentially. So I'm a little nervous about opening it up to everyone. So right now we've made content, the community resources area is already available to translators who are working in our CMS and to policy statement writers who are working in our CMS. But the policy statement writers have not contributed anything yet. Translators have. The Finnish translation team has developed new and revised community resource content. Access to the CMS will come with a one-time fee that helps me support the added costs I have to having more people in the CMS. So it's a one-time fee, not an annual fee, but a one-time only fee that would have to be negotiated with me as a representative of ALA Publishing. The HTML editor, as many of you may know, the toolkit currently has an HTML editor that allows toolkit users to create and share documents in the toolkit environment. It is not in the CMS. It exists solely just on the website. So groups with no interest in getting involved in the CMS access and wanting to avoid any kind of fees associated with it could use that HTML editor to contribute documents that would be linked to from the community resources area. Next slide. So just kind of break down what these two options mean. The benefits of the CMS are it's going to have a more prominent position within the RDA toolkit. When someone goes to the community resources space, they go to the resources tab and then look down to community resources. There'll be a breakout menus and their association or their group, their community will be more prominently featured in that list. Where the HTML contributors will be kind of gathered together on one big, on a landing page of sorts. They'll be more fully integrated into the toolkit search and browse in that regard. The page display and formatting will align with the rest of what pages look like on the toolkit. And they will be, however, confined to what we support tagging wise and formatting wise on the toolkit. They'll have greater ability to organize their documents and structure their documents in a workflow because they can use the CMS strengths of our what we call our data maps that we use to organize files, etc. They'll have technical support from me and my development team. And the CMS benefit is included with anyone who decides to do a policy statement or translation agreement with RDA Toolkit. So this is what I was talking about when I meant the browse. So right now, this is kind of just a very basic mock-up of what I see happening when you go to the resources tab and you highlight community resources, you might see breakout menus here that show community refinements and community vocabularies. Those are the two main categories we have right now that might change or have to expand. And then you would have access to these first four here are listed as entities that are already in the CMS. That second one is the Finnish library. And then you have at the bottom the other documents, and that's where documents would be gathered for the HTML contributing groups. Next slide. So the HTML editor benefits, no fees. You can go in and start using it. It would still be integrated into the toolkit search and browse, but it probably wouldn't be quite as smooth, and there might be a couple more clicks involved in getting to your material. Formatting options would not be confined to the CMS. You could do whatever formatting you like according to your HTML skills, coding skills. So you can take that to into consideration. Immediate updating of documents on the toolkit. So the HTML editor, those documents exist in the live toolkit website that you all access. So they're not part of my CMS. So they're not tied to my workflow for releases. So if you update a document in the HTML editor, it is immediately updated on the site and accessible to everyone there. It might take a little bit of time for the site to process it for it to show up in search, et cetera, and things like that. And I think what we'll do is that landing page that all the other documents are going to be collected on, we'll have to frame out, we'll have to kind of mock out that up, but the plan is that that will be a kind of an active live page that can be immediately updated as well. So they should start showing up on there. This particular option is not immediately ready to go. It's gonna take us a little bit of time to get this built and set up. So that's not a benefit. That's the one conspicuous drawback if you're really itching to get ready and get going on this. I do anticipate that we'll have this option developed before the end of 2023, hopefully, you know, not December, but before the end of August or in September at the very latest. So that's the plan there. Next slide. So this is just a little mock-up of that I did with my with the interface, the HTML interface, where what we would do is we would have, if someone wanted to ask to be to contribute community resources through the HTML editor, we would indicate that in their institution site or whatever the group site is. So, and also this doesn't have to be tied to an institution. If it's a group, say like OLAC wanted to do this, we would create a special account for OLAC in the RDA Toolkit that would then allow us to them to have that profile login so they could go in and create the documents, and then we would have a special indication that they're a community resource contributor. So they would have an additional menu box here, like you see pictured in red, in the red circle on this slide, in the red box on this slide. And that could be a drop-down menu that lets you further tag it as a certain type of community resource. This will all have to be worked out. And then we know that's a document that becomes tagged as a document that's a community resource. And that's how the site will know to pull that into the other documents page. Next slide. So there are several open issues, obviously, still to work through with this CR space, which is why it's still going to take a little while. One, and this kind of is squarely in the court of the RSC, is we need some criteria for who qualifies as a community resource contributor, and what our expectations are for that CR content, and generally who's providing oversight, making sure the stuff that's getting posted is correct and accurate and meets the parameters that we set. There's been some discussion about that going to regional communities, regional groups, regional organizations, or when that's not available to the RDA dev team. We still have some development issues to talk about. I've kind of hinted at a few of them about how we make the HTML editor contributions work and identify them, and what kind of options we need to set up as far as categories, et cetera, like that. And then finally, that ownership of the legacy English language content. So that content that's frozen, and it can remain frozen as legacy content, but it can also be the starting point for new revised content by a group to be named. I know there's been some preliminary discussions among folks in maybe at Library of Congress in Canada and Britain and Australia and other places about forming such a group that can discuss these things. But someone needs to take ownership of that English language content if it's going to be a living, adaptive piece of text. So that needs to be worked out as well. Next slide. Timeline. Those CMS, with CMS access, when ready to contribute, CR documents can begin almost immediately. As I said, the Finns have already done this. They've actually created a third category of content in the community resource page beyond vocabularies and refinements. I wish I could tell you what it was about, but I don't read Finnish. Those looking to contribute using the HTML editor will likely take several months to fully plan out and implement this practice. So like I said before, I'm hoping for by September 23. That's kind of my goal for this. Next slide. That's it. Thank you, and I will wait for questions later in the webinar.
Yes, we will have a general Q&A after our last session. Our last topic, but not least, is about the PCC's RDA Toolkit test. Adam Barron, as the co-chair of the PCC's task group, will bring us the latest update of the test. Hand it over to you, Adam.
Thank you, Clara. Go ahead to the next slide. So I am here representing on behalf of the Program for Cooperative Cataloging task group to test the official RDA toolkit. I do want to take a moment to acknowledge all members of the task group. The work that I'm presenting today represents the collective work of everyone on the group, and I want to thank everyone for their help and contributions to this. Next slide. So the purpose of the PCC test of the official RDA toolkit is to conduct a thorough test of the official RDA toolkit to ensure that PCC catalogers can use the toolkit, the related LC PCC policy statements, and metadata guidance documents to accurately catalog materials in various formats in both MARC and BibFrame. The second goal is to ensure that the LC PCC policy statements and metadata guidance documents work well in the new toolkit before PCC implements. And lastly, we hope the test will identify possible revisions to policies and guidance, as well as possible training needs. Next slide. Today, I'm going to focus on breaking the test up into 3 different categories. or phases, essentially. The first is the test, the second is the evaluation, and finally is the analysis. So to start, we have the test. Next slide. So during the test, we asked testers to create 6 to 8 bibliographic records and at least 1 authority record, if NACO trained, using the official RDA toolkit, the LC-PCC policy statements, and the metadata guidance documentation. As part of their test, we asked them to document the steps taken to describe the items, as well as the difficulties encountered in order to identify where policies and guidance may need revision. In particular, for the first 4 bibliographic records they created and all authority records, we asked testers to document all instructions, policies, and guidance applied and any decisions made. For the remaining bibliographic records, testers were required to only document instructions, policies, and guidance not applied in the previous records. We recognized that asking testers to document all instructions, policies, and guidance applied is a lot of work. However, we felt it was important to ensure testers were able to find and apply the appropriate policies and guidance, since that is the primary purpose of the test. We also hoped that by having them document their entire process, it would help with the evaluation of the test. Next slide. To assist the testers, we developed 4 documents. The first were guidelines. We developed 2 templates and a post-test survey for the testers. And Jamie will put a link in the chat for the documentation for testers. Next slide. So I'm going to go through all of those documents briefly. So the first is the guidelines for testers. This provides detailed instructions for completing the test and filling out the template. If you look at the image, you'll notice a lot of the instructions are for how to fill out the template that we created. So the basic procedure for the test was to have catalogers catalog their items, document the instructions, policies, and guidance applied, notate any questions or problems they encountered. After completing everything, we asked them to upload their final records and any surrogates, and lastly, to submit the post-test survey. Next slide. Each tester was provided with a blank tester template. At the bottom, so each template, there's each slide or each sheet in this spreadsheet represents 1 record. And we asked them to record the RDA elements, the marked fields or bibframe property, the value that they recorded. We asked them to copy the instruction from the RDA toolkit that they applied, as well as the URI for that instruction. We also asked them to copy any LC-PCC policy statements applied or metadata guidance documents applied. In the last column, we asked them to notate any notes or problems that they encountered. Next slide. To provide an example of how the tester template should be completed, we provided a sample, which identified a couple elements for a resource that we've provided that went through how various elements that we selected would be recorded. And it was meant just to provide a sample for the testers to demonstrate how the template should be filled out. Next slide. Lastly, after completing their tests and uploading their documentation, testers completed a post-test survey. Some of the questions in the post-test survey asked testers if they encountered any difficulty interpreting the official RDA, if they noticed any areas that require extra attention during training, if they felt the official RDA toolkit is ready to be used now, if testers had any suggestions to help with the implementation process. And our last 2 questions are if there were any policies or metadata guidance that should be revisited before or after implementation by PCC. Next slide. After developing our documentation, we went about recruiting testers. So there were 2 calls for participation. The first call was sent out in December 2021 by the chair of the PCC Policy Committee. The second call was sent out in September of 2022 by the task group after we had completed our documentation. As part of our call, all testers were asked to complete our participation survey. The survey included detailed information about the test, including all documentation. We wanted to make sure that anyone who was volunteering to participate in the test was aware of what they were being asked to do prior to confirming that they were interested in participating. So as part of the survey, we did ask them to confirm their interest in participating. We asked them to identify the format and the level of expertise that they wanted, of the resources that they wanted to catalog for the test, as well as the languages and scripts. We also asked them if they were interested in testing in BibFrame. Next slide. So as we were developing our documentation and survey for the testers, we were doing the same thing with our evaluators. So once the participation surveys were completed, we matched all testers with evaluators based on the format and language and script expertise. There were 50 testers that were selected to participate. This included 36 different institutions, including academic, public, national, and government libraries, as well as testers from the United States, Canada, and Europe. Next slide. From the formats selected, we had different categories. So from text, we had electronic and print books, graphic novels, legal materials, and rare materials. Audiovisual or audio and music included music audio discs, scores, spoken word audio discs, and streaming audio. Cartographic included atlases and maps. Video, streaming video, video games, and video discs. Continuing resources, including integrating resources and serials. And then we had 3 others, kits, photographs, and realia. We specifically identified some languages and scripts, including Chinese, Cyrillic, Hebrew, and Japanese, and testers were given the choice of English or any other Latin script. Next slide. After testers were selected to participate in the test, we organized 2 training sessions for testers. The first was training for using the official RDA Toolkit. This included topics such as logging into the toolkit and creating a profile, navigating the toolkit, searching the toolkit, and personalizing the toolkit, such as how to create views for viewing the policy statements. The second training session that we offered included the purpose and overview of the test, the introduction to the tester template and folders, and a demonstration on how to fill out the template. Jamie can put the link to this training in the chat for you. Next slide, thank you. After the testing was complete, all testers received an assignment email, which included their assigned formats, their assigned editors, whether MARC or Sinopia, their assigned tester template that was created by the task group, and their assigned Google Drive folder for uploading their completed records and surrogates. Lastly, they were given a link to the post-test survey for testers. So the testing period was officially from October 17th through November 4th of this year. Next slide. Since the test has completed a little bit, I have some preliminary results to share with you. So 45 testers of the 50 completed the test. 285 records were created, including 46 authority records. Of the 239 bibliographic records that were created, 23 of them were BibFrame records that were created in Sinopia. In looking at the languages and scripts that were cataloged, we see a bit more expansion from the languages and scripts that were originally assigned, including Dutch, French, German, Italian, Spanish, Serbian, and Ukrainian. Next slide. Here we have some graphs just demonstrating the bibliographic records created and the authority records created. If you notice, half the bibliographic records created represented text, followed by about 19% were continuing resources, which were serials and integrating resources. 12% were video, 10% were audio music. Of the authority records created, 44% represented persons, while 35% represented corporate bodies. So those are very preliminary results at this time. the evaluation is continuing right now. So next slide, Clara. So you can go ahead to the next slide. So the evaluation, during the evaluation, evaluators are asked to review the bibliographic and authority records that testers created using the official RDA toolkit, the LCPCC policy statements, and the metadata guidance documentation. They will analyze the tester templates and compile comments and observations in order to identify where policies and guidance may need revision. Next slide. So similar to the documentation for testers, we created documentation for evaluators. Jamie will put the link in the chat for these. So again, there's guidelines, templates, and post-test survey. Next slide. So the guidelines for evaluators provide detailed instructions for compiling the for completing the evaluation and filling out the template. So the basic procedure for the evaluation is to review the assigned tester templates, document all issues encountered either by the tester or the evaluator, and then to submit the post-test survey. Next slide. So we created a template for the evaluators. We asked them to identify sort of the record where the problem originated from, the format, whether it was MARC or BibFrame, the RDA element that was recorded, the section of the RDA toolkit, whether it's an RDA entity, a guidance chapter, or community resource, the specific page that was referenced, and we asked them to include the text of the RDA instruction as well, and the URI. We've identified several problem types, which we thought would be likely to come up. This includes problems in the LCPCC policy statements, problem in a metadata guidance document, a disconnect between documentation, an incorrect element, incorrect instruction, or an incorrect value, information that was missed by a tester, typographical error in documentation, whether it's a problem in the RDA toolkit itself, and any other problems that the testers encounter. We also include comments or separate columns here for them to comment on policy statements, metadata guidance, and any general comments. Next slide. So similar to the testers, we wanted to create a sample template for the evaluators. In order to create data or a tester template that the evaluators were using, we created a sample template or sample tester template with mistakes. So this intentionally includes mistakes in it so that we can comment or create a sample for the evaluators. Next slide. So, and this is our sample template for evaluators. Again, it documents how we expect the testers to complete their template during their evaluation. Next slide. Last, after completing their evaluation, they complete a post-test survey for evaluators. It includes similar questions to those that were posed to the testers, including if there were issues that the testers seem to have difficulty interpreting RDA, areas that require extra attention during training, and anything that could help with implementation. Next slide. In terms of recruiting evaluators, the recruitment initially focused on those who wrote policy statements or metadata guidance documents. This is a very small pool, and so we did expand it to those who had a good working knowledge of official RDA. In the end, we have 19 evaluators participating in the test. All evaluators completed a participation survey similar to the testers. Again, they were provided with all the documentation up front and were asked to identify the formats and level of expertise, as well as the languages and scripts they could evaluate, as well as if they could evaluate records created in BibFrame. Next slide. Similar to testers, we provided an orientation for evaluators. This took place last Monday. The topics for the session included the purpose and overview of the test, an introduction to the evaluator template and files, and a demonstration of how to fill the template. So Jamie will put a link into the chat where these slides are located. Next slide. And then at the end of last week, all evaluators received an assignment email, which included links to each of their assigned testers' Google Drive folders, which includes the testers' templates and their records and surrogates. Each testers were sent their assigned evaluator template that was created by the task group, and each evaluator has an assigned Google Drive folder. We also included a link to the post-test survey and all documentation that they would need. We've also created an evaluation roster, an evaluator roster so evaluators can reach out to other evaluators for the test if they need help evaluating any records that they've encountered. So the evaluation period for the test officially begins today and runs through January 6th of next year. Next slide. So moving on to the analysis, this will begin in January after the completion of the evaluation. Next slide. So the analysis, this is where we intend to aggregate the results from the evaluation to identify where LCPCC policy statements and metadata guidance documentation may need revision. We will analyze the results of the post-test surveys from testers and evaluators to provide recommendations for PCC implementation and training. And lastly, we will prepare a final report of the results and recommendations, which is expected in March of 2023. Next slide. So any questions about the test can be asked in the follow-up Q&A session, or you can always email the task group at PCC RDA test at list.berkeley.edu. Lastly, I want to take a moment today just to thank everyone who's participated in the test, all of the testers and evaluators. We couldn't have done this without your participation, and I want to thank you so much for helping with this analysis or with this test. I know so many people are interested in the results of this test. So thank you everyone for participating and helping.
Thank you, Adam. So now we move on to the last general Q&A session. I think more questions pop up in the Q&A. Jamie?
Yes. The first question, I think it's to me, is it possible to make quarterly RDA release notes available outside the subscription paywall? Yes, it is. And I will do that for December, the December release. Just a note on that. The links that you see in the release notes that open up PDFs, those will not be included if I move it outside the paywall. So I'll basically post a PDF outside the paywall. That'll give you all the text, but you won't be able to link to the PDFs. That will still require a subscription. All right. The next question, there are many fewer examples in the official toolkit than there were in the original RDA. Will more examples be added throughout? Kathy, do you want to answer that?
Sure. I would just like to remind all of you that, in fact, what Ahava talked about in trying to internationalize RDA, simply carrying over the existing examples was not possible, both in terms of internationalization and in terms of the way we reconceived RDA as part of the 3R project. So the examples editor continues to work on this. It is a complex process. She is absolutely interested in hearing from you if you have specific examples about what needs to be added. And I would encourage you to contact her directly at honor@rdatoolkit.org, or you can use the feedback button for that kind of thing. We know there need to be more examples. It's just a complex process that takes time.
All right. Next question is, have any of the barriers which delayed work on a bib frame mapping in 2022 been addressed yet?
The barriers, I think, largely are the complexity of trying to map RDA to bib frame, period. Bib frame is a complex model. RDA has many, many elements, thousands of them. They don't follow the same underlying data model. And this level of complexity means that it's really difficult work. And there are also different flavors, if you will, of BibFrame, and we won't be able to map to all of them. So it's picking the one to map to and trying to figure out how to let the other flavors of BibFrame work on that as well. We know it's important. It's also whether it's mapping or alignments or how all of that works together. It's been a moving target, and that's part of why it's taken extra time.
Okay, and here's a question for Adam. When the final report is compiled, how will feedback on RDA itself be sent to the RSC? Directly to the RSC chair, to NARDAC?
My feeling right now is that it would be sent directly to the RSC chair. If there's because I feel like that's the best place right now. If there's a better place other than the RSC chair, please let me know. We'll send it to whoever wants it. But I think the RSC is the best place for it.
Jamie, I would add that I answered 2 questions as text
Okay.
during the, so one was who is the new RSC secretary-elect, and that's Anne Welsh in the UK. And the other question was about punctuation being removed from OCLC records. And I'm not aware of lots of libraries doing this, but I also suggested in my answer that this is a more appropriate question for OCLC webinar rather than an RDA webinar.
Thanks a lot for all the questions and then the answers from the panelists. Any other question? Seems we have
One just came in, yes. What is the timeline for RSC determining who can qualify as a contributor to the community resources via the content management system? Will it happen before the HTML editor option becomes available? My expectation, Kathy can certainly chime in with her thoughts, but my expectation is that we will have criteria and parameters set before we make the HTML editor option live on the toolkit. So hopefully in the next 6 months or so.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely necessary. I don't think we can open up an option before we know who can use it.
Yep. And we have another one. For material removed from community resources, for example, abbreviations, etc., are they being put somewhere else, or do communities of practice need to take ownership of them in order to recreate them? Well, just to clarify, no materials being removed from community resources. It's been removed from RDA and moved to community resources, just so we all understand. So the material that was moved to community resources, the English language material that's there right now, does need a community to take up ownership. But beyond that, anything coming in from a different community, if they're kind of meet our expectations for contributing, they have ownership of it. They take it from there.
And then I think the next step would be for the ownership of those community resources. If they do decide to remove something entirely, then they need to communicate with the users of those resources and then let them know if they still want that support, how else they might be able to accommodate that.
Yes. Seems to be all the questions we have, Clara.
Yes, I think so. Let's see. There are 9 minutes left. If no more questions, I think we can catch up some daylight here and this forum now, and then hopefully to catch up more in the future forum. Any other questions coming up? Oh, thank you very much. Thank you. And okay,
I'll just add that I will post the recordings, and if you want to send me the slides, I'll get everything posted The recording will be posted on the YouTube channel, the RDA Toolkit YouTube channel, and so you can link to it from there too. So
Sure. Yes, sure. The presentation will also be posted in NARDAC website, in the RSC website. So
Okay.
hopefully, yeah, hopefully folks can check more detailed information, especially those links the presenters mentioned in their presentations. Again, thank you very much for everything for the presenters, especially Dr. Cohen and Ms. McGuire. Thanks a lot for joining us today. And then also thank you, all the participants for joining us with your questions and with your support. Thank you very much. Keep in touch, and then we will see you in the future. Bye.